Hello, everyone, and welcome to this technical webinar in relation to the SIDS Lighthouse at the International Renewable Energy Association. My name is Paul Holtus. I am the head of the World Ocean Council, and we're really very pleased and honored to have been invited by the International Renewable Energy Agency, IRENA, to host this event and to serve as moderator. We would like to jump right in. We have a very full program here and some great speakers from across the issues and from around the world. And what I'd like to do then is open the session by inviting Ms. Gauri Singh, the Deputy Director General for IRENA, to kick off the session with some opening remarks. Gauri, over to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Paul. Excellency Courtney Rathre, Under Secretary General and High Representative, the UN Office of the High Representative for the Least Developed Countries, Landlocked Developing Countries, Small Island Developing States, all the invited speakers, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to this event, Accelerating Offshore Wind and Floating Solar PV in Small Island Developing States, on behalf of the Director General of IRENA, who unfortunately was not able to attend due to some prior commitments. This webinar will focus on offshore wind, floating solar PV, and it's really the first part of a three-part technical series on offshore renewables and ocean technologies in small island developing states, including ocean thermal energy conversion, wave and tidal energy, which will continue in January 2022. So currently, 30% of the oceans and seas are governed by small island developing states. And according to the International Institute on Sustainable Development, an increasing number of SIDS are actually identifying themselves as large ocean states due to the huge ocean areas and resources that are within their jurisdiction. So it's only fitting that we are starting to ramp up the development of ocean resources to transform the SIDS economies and provide a pathway to meet their sustainable development goals and the Paris Agreement. So in addition to providing electricity, ocean energy, as we all know, can also bring significant socioeconomic benefits to the SIDS and the coastal communities, like job creation, improved livelihoods, local value chains, and enhanced synergies among the blue economy actors. So I'm pleased to note that over the years, we have witnessed increased deployment of offshore technologies, including ocean energy, around the world. And IRENA estimates that around 10 gigawatts of ocean energy capacity could be commercially deployed by 2030. And at the same time, we also recognize that SIDS require innovative solutions that are tailored to meet their specific needs and local conditions. And with this event, we hope to demonstrate a very strong commitment to exploring and accelerating these technologies in the SIDS context. Some of you may be aware that IRENA has established a collaborative framework on ocean energy offshore renewables, which covers an array of technologies. And we have recently come out with a publication on ocean energy, including the Innovation Outlook, which is focusing on ocean energy technologies and fostering a blue economy with a focus on offshore renewable energy. That publication will provide you with insights on the current status, future prospects, and the recommended key action to accelerate the deployment and commercialization. So with this webinar series, we hope to take a deep dive into various technologies, starting today with the offshore wind and floating solar PV, so that SIDS, our partners, private sector, and other key stakeholders can gain increased understanding of where we are in terms of the advancements of technology, their application, the feasibility of the various technologies that may be relevant to the SIDS. We do understand that with the SIDS, their land remains a primary limitation, and which is why many governments have started exploring the potential of these offshore technologies. With this webinar has been organized through the SIDS Lighthouses initiatives, which many of you would know is a partnership that is coordinated by IRENA. And this is a partnership that's been playing a very important role in the past and hopes to continue playing an active role in advancing the deployment of these technologies. I would like to express our gratitude to the Under-Secretary General for his presence here today and for his commitment to our joint partnership to support the SIDS in overcoming the challenges associated with sustainable development. So before I conclude, let me also express my sincere appreciation and thank the invited speakers for accepting the invitation. And we very much look forward to a fruitful discussion on these issues. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Gauri, for those introductory comments from Irena. And now we'd like to move to Mr. Courtney Rattray, UN Under-Secretary General and High Representative for the UN Office of the High Representative for the Least Developed Countries, Landlocked Developing Countries, and Small Island Developing States. And here at the World Ocean Council, we're very happy and honored to be working closely with UN OHR LLS on a variety of issues regarding small island states and sustainable development. So, sir, over to you.
Thank you very much, Paul. Ms. Gauri Singh, Deputy Director General, IRENA, distinguished participants, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. It's a real pleasure for me to join you at this series of webinars, which will explore how to accelerate the development of ocean technologies in SIDS. The adherence that SIDS have shown towards the Paris Agreement embodies a commitment to the transformation towards renewable energy. In fact, as you may know, no fewer than 33 of 38 SIDS include targets for renewable energy development in their nationally determined contributions. And rightly so, because renewable energy is vital to SIDS sustainable development, not just through helping to achieve the 1.5-degree target and the SDGs, but as a catalyst for securing sustained economic growth and human capital development. Being heavily reliant on the import of fossil fuels, SIDS have an opportunity to accomplish economic transformation through renewable energies. Such a transformation stimulates local value chain development. As we've heard, job creation, it improves livelihoods and builds resilience to economic and natural shocks. The first webinar in the series is focused on offshore wind and floating solar photovoltaics. Both technologies have significant potential to be viable offshore renewable technologies for the SIDS, but there is much work to do if we are to fully harness their potential. Work that we cannot do single-handedly, that is, without each other. It is therefore a pleasure to connect with you today as representatives of the public and private sectors, civil society, and SIDS development partner countries. As I'm sure you will agree, the forging of a strategic approach to partnerships is indispensable to successfully achieving the Samoa pathway and the sustainable development goals in SIDS. To achieve real results, we need to come together across sectors to develop and implement innovative solutions to the unique challenges facing these islands. We need the private sector to support technological innovation. We need the public sector to build an enabling environment for these technologies to thrive. And we need civil society to serve as thought leaders and advocate for the transformation towards and the adoption of these technologies. As I said, there is much work to be done. Indeed, given the relatively high capital costs associated with these technologies, there are challenges that must be overcome in developing a sound business case that supports their commercialization. As noted in IRENA's report of last year entitled Innovation Outlook, Ocean Energy Technologies, financing opportunities must be improved and innovative finance mechanisms must be developed to support capital and revenue, which could help drive down the levelized cost of electricity. I would also point out that depending on the local circumstances, these technologies might already be commercially viable as an alternative to conventional fossil fuel energy. However, much support is needed to achieve the necessary scale for a true energy transition in these countries. I hope that today's discussion will allow participants to share experiences and lessons learned, identify feasible commercial frameworks, and explore new opportunities. Before I close, it would be remiss of me were I to fail to inform you that next February, my office, the OHR LLS, is organizing the SIDS Global Business Network Forum in Palau in parallel to the Our Oceans Conference. The forum will promote genuine and effective partnerships between SIDS and the private sector, partnerships that can contribute to the achievement of SDG 14, which is to conserve the ocean and employ the sustainable use of the ocean, seas, and marine resources in the SIDS, as well as the Samoa Pathway. The forum will focus on themes such as the blue economy and ocean energy. We intend to bring forward the outcomes from this webinar series to the forum. I invite you to reach out to OHR LLS to indicate your interest in participating so we can maintain the momentum surrounding this important work. I look forward to the continuous collaboration across sectors throughout this technical webinar series, the SIDS Global Business Network Forum and beyond. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Undersecretary General, and really appreciate the focus on the private sector here. And for those of you that are joining late, we are here at the IRENA first event within the webinar series, and this event in particular focusing on accelerating development for offshore wind and floating solar PV. I'm Paul Holtis, the World Ocean Council CEO. We are the Global Blue Economy Business and Investment Organization. So Undersecretary General, that focus on the private sector is so important in advancing renewables in small island developing states. And so to really get us into the content and the substance of our event today, we have Mr. Ben Blackwell, Chief Executive Officer for the Global Wind Energy Council, to kick us off with the overview scene-setting presentation. So Ben, please.
Great, thank you very much. Ms. Gauri Singh, Deputy Director of IRENA, Undersecretary General, Mr. Moderator Paul Holtis, thank you very much for inviting me to this webinar on this very important subject. I'm going to give a brief presentation on where we are with offshore wind, and particularly looking at the possibilities of floating offshore wind, given its application for small island states and the kind of flexibility that brings. I'm just going to try and bring up my presentation. Do this. Give me a second, bear with me 1 second. Okay. Okay, great. Can you all see that? Great, thank you. Okay, so first of all, just to explain who we are. So the Global Wind Energy Council is the representative body for the global wind energy industry. We are made up of all the private sector companies that take part in the wind energy supply chain, manufacturers, energy producers, technology companies. And we're responsible collectively among our companies for probably around 90 or more % of all the installed wind power capacity around the world. And what GWEC has done traditionally is to try and help countries adopt wind power as a solution, going back 12 or 15 years, by creating networks in the countries that have high wind potential, by providing technical assistance, by providing policy support, by forming local business wind and renewables associations that can carry out advocacy and other work locally, and by providing thought leadership and advocacy globally through interacting with international institutions such as the UNFCCC, IRENA, World Bank and the IFC, the IMF, and so on and so on. And we've just come off the back of, like many people, a very intense campaign around COP26, where we've really being able to present offshore wind energy as a kind of key climate solution for reaching these very ambitious targets that we have ahead of ourselves. And at COP, we also started to put together the work to create a new global offshore wind alliance, along with IRENA and the Danish government and other governments that we met with. And we're hoping to make that alliance operational in the very near term, in order to be able to share experience and technical knowledge and really try and accelerate wind power installations around the world to the level which are needed. These are some of our members. As you'll see, it's kind of large scale supply chain companies, utilities, and so on. And many companies are coming into the offshore wind sector now, also from traditional oil and gas sectors, people like Shell and BP and Total. And we're seeing a real explosion of investor interest and of government interest. Yeah, those are some of the people we work with. We're working across a multi-stakeholder environment with many different international institutions. Now, let's get down to the content. So wind power has been a big success story really over 20, 30 years. It's seen exponential growth. And now what we're seeing increasingly is investment in offshore wind power. So offshore starts as a very, very small part of the overall wind power installation bucket. It's now increasing steadily, and we'd expect offshore wind to go to 20, 30% of global installations quite quickly during the next decade. Now, the international institutions such as IRENA have extremely ambitious ambitions, as does GWEC. And in fact, IRENA and GWEC recently launched a UN compact, which calls for 380 gigawatts of wind energy by 2030. Now, that sounds extremely ambitious, and it is ambitious, but it's not impossible. And in fact, if you look at the kind of growth we're seeing, we're looking at, for instance, something like 230 gigawatts already in the pipeline under the kind of business as usual, where we are right now scenario. So these are very big numbers, but our numbers are going up quite fast every single year. As you can see, Europe starts as the kind of home of offshore wind, and it's where the first projects are created and implemented and deployed. And then China and the rest of Asia then becomes more and more important. And we see the whole APAC region in particular as playing a really fundamental role in getting us to these kind of big 2030 and 2050 targets. We also see areas such as North America now coming into the picture. There's strong interest from some countries in South America, in Oceania, and many other areas around the world. And there's very, very good potential in many other places where we've barely got started. Now, if you look at some of the kind of technology drivers, I mean, you know, a vast simplification would be to say that turbines are getting extremely large. And the scale of both the wind farms and the turbines is driving cost reduction across the sector. You can see this graph on the left-hand side. I mean, it's really you know, an incredibly kind of steep curve from going to 4 megawatt turbines to going to 12 megawatt turbines right now, and now the 15 megawatt turbines which have been launched to the market, and some of the projects, very large projects, are already being built on the basis of these 15 megawatts projects. And what that does through scale, larger rotor sizes, is continually drive down the megawatt hour cost of energy, to the point where offshore wind is, you know, competitive in many regions already with fossil, and is fast becoming so in most of the other regions. And we've seen these cost reductions driven through auctions across the European states, then in North America, and now in China as well, which has moved to a provincial auctioning system. And you know, we see this trend continuing, maybe not at the same rate, but certainly driving down the cost to a level where it's competitive with fossil pretty much everywhere, and obviously far cheaper than other technologies such as nuclear. So we're looking at predominantly now fixed foundations, and that's the area where cost has been driven down through industrialization steadily, but now increasingly also floating foundations. And floating foundations, I'll go on to talk a little bit more, but it's I think it has, you know, particular significance and relevance for the small island states. Now, the levelized cost of energy for floating is not as low as for fixed bottom at this point, but again, it's being driven down fairly rapidly. Governments are adopting auction frameworks specifically to support floating offshore wind. We're seeing in places like the UK and other places, and we're already seeing projects pitched in you know, quite competitive and increasingly competitive cost level. So again, with industrialization, we expect the cost to go down quite rapidly, and our wind potential studies have shown us that there are countries with very high energy demands, very good wind resource, which have deep water and which will require floating as a solution. Once the other one, this is just a graph on cost. You can see it's pretty, you know, it's pretty dramatic, and as I said, it's been driven by rapid adoption in Europe and other places, and in China, and through this auction system. I think it's really exceeded anybody's expectations, to the point where, you know, looking at today's energy prices, it's actually a very competitive source, and it's one of the sources where you can add quite large blocks of power very, you know, in a reasonably fast time frame, which is why I think it's attractive to many developing governments. I mean, the main drivers are affordable electricity prices, cost reduction, clean power to millions of homes. We're now at gigawatt scale projects across the world. I mean, to give an idea on the technology side, the newest 15 megawatt turbines, one revolution of the turbine can supply an entire household for an entire year. That's just one revolution in time of the turbine. Obviously, it's one of the fastest ways to reduce carbon emissions by replacing or abating fossil fuel energy. Again, you know, there's strong economic arguments around places, particularly where there's high cost of using things like diesel-based fossil energy in small generators. There's a significant impact on economic growth and for job creation. So we estimate that a 500 megawatt project creates something like 2.1 million person days of work, so about 10,000 jobs over a 25-year lifetime. And those are figures from the IRENA renewable energy jobs report that we collaborated with. It delivers energy security because it reduces or eliminates the need for imported fossil fuels. It reduces air pollution, and it saves water because obviously fossil fuels are a major consumer of water resources around the world as well. So where are we going for the next 10 years? Well, the annual installations are growing pretty exponentially. We can see what's in the pipeline already from auctions and countries which have made new commitments or declared new ambitions. So we go actually from 6 gigawatts in 2020, which was a fairly kind of reasonable year, to a very big year in 2021 this year, which is just completing, and a particularly big year for China in 2021. We then see a small dip but in 2022, but still above the 2020 level, and then a steady climb as these new auctions and new targets come in. And we've seen some very large industrial countries with very significant commitments. I mean, the UK has a 40 gigawatt commitment by 2030. Germany has a 20 gigawatt commitment. Japan has a 10 gigawatt commitment, but then it has a 45 gigawatt commitment by 2040. Korea has a significant commitment. Vietnam is revising its PDP, and we expect a significant commitment there, and so on. And that adds up to something like 500 billion in capital expenditure this decade, and something like $3 trillion in capital expenditure by 2050, as we go towards this 2 terawatt target, which is in IRENA's World Energy Transitions Outlook report. Now let's just go to floating. I mean, floating, we're starting in a much, obviously a lower level, and it's a newer technology, but it's made really the major technical advancements are already in place. I mean, the major kind of field of prototypes has been narrowed down. There's several now viable floating foundation solutions that can be scaled up rapidly and industrialized, and the performance numbers that have come in from the multiple pilot plants around the world, such as the High Wind project in the UK, have been very, very good, and actually surprisingly good in some cases in terms of availability and capacity factors. So we're confident now that we've gone through this kind of pilot phase. We now need to go to deployable commercial scale projects that really take this to a new level of industrialization. We're seeing some governments, such as the UK government, already kind of ring fencing areas for floating within their auction system, and also economic systems within their auction systems in order to give price stability for floating projects. We're seeing that in Japan as well, and other places, in Korea. So we're quite confident that will allow a very rapid scale up of floating offshore wind from these kind of quite small sizes we're seeing now to quite significant amounts in 2030. So something like 6 to 6.5 gigawatts annually by 2030. Now, in order to do that, it's going to require a lot of collaboration on the technology side. There's still a lot of that needs to be done in terms of setting standards, in terms of agreeing common approaches, in terms of government regulation and legislative support that's going to be needed to make sure that markets work properly to bring in floating. Now, I just want to say one thing. I know I'm running out of time. For small island states, what floating wind brings is flexibility. I mean, these are individual turbines rather than necessarily hundreds of turbines on fixed bottoms, right? And the production flexibility this can give you is that the floating turbine can be towed from a different area across actually quite large distances. So the industrialization may be taking, the construction or assembly may take place somewhere completely different. It can plug into the grid on a kind of modular or scalable basis, so you don't need huge amounts of grid reinforcement. It can be done on the level of scaling individual turbines. So it really does kind of open up a new kind of vista, I think, for islands. And what we've seen is, addressing these questions, so lower power demand, more modular, scalable, not necessarily on the same enormous scale that we're seeing in the North Sea or in the US or in China. We're seeing growing power demand, obviously, in the small island states. We're seeing numerous diesel generators that have a very high cost of $180 a megawatt hour. That's much higher already than where the offshore wind average cost is, and actually higher even than where floating is already. So there's already an economic argument. There's lack of large industrial scale manufacturing, and again, floating can kind of help address that. And there are challenges, of course, such as deep waters, tropical storms, but there's very strong reasons for small island states to do this. And then just one final slide. So we, looking at ESMAP and the World Bank Group's kind of global study of technical potential for new offshore wind markets, we see the main opportunity in the Caribbean, where there's very strong, good wind resources. There's also obviously large clusters of larger islands, which can form synergies, and we can use floating across those, and some fixed bottom, but also in places like Fiji, PNG, Vanuatu, Mauritius. I mean, there's many good places, but this is really going to require a collaborative effort. It's going to require flexibility and a kind of can-do attitude. It will require efforts to kind of bridge funding gap and to provide proper support for making these capital investments. But we think the benefit and the potential is actually quite attractive and very clear for small island states. So we're very much looking forward to taking part in this process, and the meeting that you mentioned under Secretary General in Palau, and we're here very much engaged with IRENA to try and help islands scale up this potential and realize this potential as quickly as possible. So thank you very much for your time.
Thanks very much, Ben, for that very comprehensive overview, and you really captured in a short amount of time the exciting developments, incredible progress that's been made in offshore wind, and particularly the really important and exciting developments of floating offshore, and the value of that to, and opportunities that's creating for SIDS. So we look forward to diving into that a bit further with the next session here, or portion of our event here, looking at case examples for offshore wind and floating solar PV. And there are questions coming in. We'll bring those in as possible, and certainly those will be forwarded to the speakers if we're not able to get to them. And so what I'd like to do now is introduce our next two speakers, presenters, who will be giving some case study examples. We have Jen Tan, who's head of integrated solutions for Singapore and Southeast Asia with Sembcorp, who we're honored to have as a member of the World Ocean Council. And she will be followed by Kate Johannesson, who's head of project and technology development and renewables with the Exodus Group. So Jen, if I could invite you to go ahead and make your presentation, which I see is on the screen. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Mr. Paul. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jen Tan. You can see my slide well, right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So I'm heading up the integrated solutions. Mainly, actually, we do solar in Sembcorp. So for today, my presentation will be the first part to introduce who is Sembcorp, and really deep dive into the project that we have in Singapore. Sembcorp is currently operating in 11 countries. We are actually a government-linked company. We're owned by Temasek, 49.5%, and we have got more than 5,000 employees. Our HQ is in Singapore. Our business is mainly into renewables, utility scale wind and solar projects. We also do conventional. In total, as of today, we have about 14 gigawatts of assets globally. And we are also very strong in the integrated urban solutions. Looking at the global mega trends, decarbonization, electrification, urbanization is is the way to go. And you know, and looking at Asia, there is a big market for sustainable solutions opportunity. The size that we are looking at in 2025 is about 1.2 gigawatt with a CAGR growth of 15%. That's very exciting for us as a company to really look into going renewables. So sustainability is our business, and you know, with these global mega trends and our purpose, with the intention to transform from brown to green, and we want to deliver this through sustainable solutions, and we are very focused on renewables and as well as integrated urban solutions. And the location that we are looking at is really Southeast Asia, China, and Singapore. This is also aligned with our ESG goals, mainly to provide clean energy and to help the climate action. And with our strong governance, we believe that we can deliver this as part of the mega trend. So I mean, that was about the company, right? We do have a established solar portfolio in rooftop. In Singapore, we've got you know, close to 400 megawatts, and that's on 2,700 rooftops. And then also in Vietnam and in India, we have got rooftop, solar. And the range of our solar energy portfolio, we really do business development, project development, the entire value chain of activities for our solar energy portfolio. I think our key competency is really to make sure that we you know, deliver the asset and we monitor it well, and we deliver the performance according to plan through our monitoring system. Okay, and we are really focused on long-term growth, and we work with institutions to make sure that we do have a you know, end-to-end, like we build the capabilities through partnering with the schools. We also work on recycling the solar panels, and with all these learnings that we get together with the institution, how do we then, you know, build our projects in Singapore? Okay, now this is the key point of tonight's this afternoon's presentation, right? In Singapore, I'm not sure if you all know how big Singapore is. It's about 72,800 hectares. It's a very, very small little dot. You can't even see it on the map, but we've got this very large scale floating solar farm in Singapore. It is sitting on 45 hectares of land, and we've got 122,000 pieces of solar panels in this little reservoir here. So this is some fun facts for you. The total installed capacity is 60 megawatts. As I presented to you earlier, Sembcorp is one of the largest renewable energy company in Singapore, and we are looking to grow our renewable portfolio. Being a small company in Singapore, there's no other place to grow, you know, our competencies and our capabilities other than home. So in Singapore, we have built this 60 megawatt peak solar farm. I think, okay, I mean, people are catching up now with so much advanced technology in floating solar, right? But in the month that I've completed, it was one of the largest, on the size of 45 football fields. In Singapore, we've got 4-room households, so we can power up 16,000 of such households, and it actually occupies about 1/3 of the reservoir. And you know, it offsets 32 kilotons of carbon emissions. I think the interesting point is, in this small little island in Singapore, we can do such a massive scale of project. I think it is because we really built our capabilities and our technical know-how, and we managed to build this plant in actually less than 8 months. Embedding sustainability in the design of the floating PV system. I think floating PV probably is not new to most attendees in this webinar, but the details in how we get it done is very important for the longevity of the plant and of the system and the performance. So if we look at, you know, the whole ecosystem, from the PV modules, the selection of the pontoons, how do we do cabling, how do we design the anchors, where do we put the combiner box and the inverters, and then after that, how do we send it to the grid with the best performance ratio, and how do we continue to monitor? I think this is very critical to ensure that the floating PV in the world will continue to grow and to be sustainable. So floating solar is something really new in Singapore, and 60 megawatt is really a substantial size considering this small little island that we have. The benefits is, Singapore, we are also part of the green plan. We want to do our part, for the world sustainability, but unfortunately, our island is so small and we are filled with buildings and we are very densely populated. So the ability for us to build floating solar is really great because it optimizes the land use. And of course, on water, it's got higher performance, it's cooler, and there is also generally less shading. However, we do see challenges. I think one of the key challenge for floating solar is really to ensure that the cable management is done properly. Too slack, you end up is in the water. Too tight, you have breakages and you got performance issue. So finding the premium spot is really so important. Anchoring and mooring design is also very critical, especially if you have slightly deeper or more buoyant water. Of course, operations and maintenance, how do we make sure that we keep the performance at best, but minimize the cost since it's on water? Last but not least, I think the most important point is to really coexist with the biodiversity in the water and around the surrounding. So these are the challenges that we have been facing, but so far we have been performing really well. Our environmental studies shows no impact, and the performance of the PV is really doing even better than design.
Thanks.
Okay, so
sorry, Jen, I thought you were through. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, the slide just got stuck. Yeah, so I think some of the lessons learned during our construction of the floating was, we were not so fortunate. We started construction right in the middle of the pandemic, where we had issues with labor, people under lockdown and all that. So our construction, we started with about 1,200 panels per day, and we had to innovate and improve to build more with less labor, and we actually custom built a jig, and we increased the labor rate from 1,200 pieces of panels per day to 2,000 pieces of panel per day. And we also deploy a drone electroluminous imaging technology to make sure that we check every single piece of panel just in 10 days over the whole 45 hectares. Only flying drones at night to check to shave off the manual inspection cost by almost 30%. Of course, our digital monitoring platform also helps to monitor the plant. So I think the best practices, on this innovation is really to have access, and so I think the key factors for consideration for floating is really on the water body ownership, because to have access and the right to use a water body actually gives project and cost certainty. Okay, so in order for the project to make sense, you also need to have a trusted off-taker. In this case, our off-taker is our Public Utilities Board. And then whether it's on-site or, these days VPPA is very common. And then will the solar energy be consumed or is it in excess? I think bankers the bankability of the project really depends on the off-taker risk. And of course, who are the other stakeholders that, will look into the project. And in the floating case, I think environmental impact is a very, very important and critical issue where we need to look at the biodiversity and the water quality. That brings me to the end of my presentation. Sustainability is our business, and I'm very willing to learn and share notes with anyone who is keen on this growth of solar in this part of the region. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jan. Great to see that progress being made in Singapore, and clearly the applicability to small island developing states is enormous there in terms of the amount of water areas and being able to move that out and deploy that into other areas. So thanks for that great example of the progress being made on floating solar and the work of Sembcorp in Singapore in leading the way. We'll move now to Kate Johannesson at Exodus Group to make her presentation. Kate?
Hi there. Just going to start my video. Oh, there we go. There we go. And just going to share my screen there. Seems to be allowing me to do that. Okay, hopefully that's working for everybody. Right. So yes, hello everyone. I'm Kate Johannesson from Exodus Group. And so we're an energy consultancy headquartered in Scotland. So we have a lot of experience in the Scottish market, but we also work across a range of markets. So we have sort of that broader perspective on things as well. So Scotland being quite a mature market for offshore wind, I think the question here is what can we learn from that market? So this presentation is going to focus quite heavily on offshore wind. Scotland being nice and windy, unfortunately, isn't the sunniest of places, so less of a focus on solar in this presentation. So I'm going to use Scotland as a bit of a case study and some of the sort of wider UK perspective as well. So I'm going to present sort of a series of key factors for achieving commercial scale offshore wind that we found are really critical in this context. So sort of a list of the discussion topics at the bottom there. And then I'll conclude with sort of discussing around some of the main milestones that need to be met in order to achieve commercialisation. So the Scottish offshore wind industry really kind of was built off the back of the English earlier projects. And partly that's, I think, based around the conditions in Scotland being quite a bit more challenging for development. But I think that means almost it's kind of more insightful sort of a case study to use because there are sort of more challenges and barriers to development that we can take from it. I think the other aspect of Scotland is that there's quite a wide variety of project types. So we have fully sort of operational fixed wind projects. We also have a pipeline of sort of large-scale fixed and floating projects. But then we have operational pilot-scale floating wind. We have demonstrations for alternative routes to market, looking at offshore wind and hydrogen production, and offshore wind and oil and gas electrification. And we also have sort of unique sort of energy system solutions that have been realised. So particularly looking at the Scottish Islands, very remote communities, off-grid and sometimes using diesel generation. We've seen a couple of cases where those islands have moved to 100 or near 100% renewables through the use of onshore wind, solar and battery. So again, kind of an interesting case study, particularly because not just of the financial sort of business case for it, but also the sort of wider community benefits, particularly around sort of security of energy supply that has driven those projects. So the first topic to discuss is around site selection. So we do a lot of site selection, early stage work with developers at Exodus. And I guess it's kind of an obvious point, but site selection is absolutely critical to achieving a successful project. And I think particularly when we're thinking about new markets, it's really important to focus on developing the easiest sites first. So we've seen that as we've gone through the UK projects, we've been much closer to shore with nice shallow waters, monopile foundations, and then we've gradually unlocked more challenging sites as the market has matured and costs have come down and supply chains expanded and what have you. I think a key point to site selection is it's very much a holistic approach. So you're looking at the environmental, the technical and the economic considerations in tandem. Often these are competing, and it's about finding the sort of right balance of solution and dealing with qualitative and quantitative data and how to integrate those. Now, what we see in Scotland is a pretty strong sort of marine spatial planning process from the government, alongside sort of seabed exclusivity and leasing. And I think it's that carefully managed process is really important to kind of realising an optimal project pipeline, so that you have the right balance of offshore wind alongside the other stakeholders and users of the sea, in order to sort of maximise how you can progress the industry and mature the market. The next topic is technology. So the graph on the bottom right there shows a sort of typical Capex split. I think this is for a floating project. But across the board, what we'll see is the foundation and turbine costs are a huge proportion of your Capex costs. So on that basis, it's incredibly important to make the right selections when you come to foundations and turbines. So we've seen very much progression of technology, starting with the monopiles. We've now got quite a bit of track record in Scotland with jackets, and potentially we'll start to see them going up to maybe 80 metres or so water depth. And then we've got the floating foundations coming onto the market, potentially from around sort of 60-metre water depth. And at the moment, we don't really have a consensus in design for floating foundations. We've got lots of different concepts. And I think the key message here is the world kind of looks to Scotland. You know, we're sort of ahead of the game in many ways with floating. But in actual fact, the market is still incredibly immature. It's very much a developing market, and there's lots of uncertainties and risks and cost reductions needed. So it's sort of something to look to, but also I think not wait until it's ready. It's very much about kind of transferring that learning in tandem. So I think there's various innovations ongoing across the board, very much so. The other aspect we've got is the sort of larger turbine trends. The graph in the middle there kind of shows the development of turbine size over the years in UK projects. And of course, this very much drives cost reduction through, you know, you have less machines to install and maintain. But I think one thing that we've been looking at as the machines go larger and larger is what are the limitations on the supply chain? Does it essentially trigger a step change in the vessel and equipment requirements, the installation durations, the complexity of operations? And in actual fact, I think it's something to consider as to whether the absolute state of the art is the right way forward for you know, new and less mature markets. Potentially a more manageable solution could be something slightly smaller that means that you can sort of grow the supply chain with sort of more tried and tested methods. So that kind of moves nicely into the ports and supply chain. It's another absolutely critical factor for project development. Particularly floating wind has very unique requirements for ports and the supply chain, but even fixed has its own sort of optimal solutions. So Scotland, very much the supply chain has been built off the back of the mature oil and gas supply chain, but it's sort of gradually being developed for sort of specific offshore wind capabilities in order to again sort of see cost reductions through efficiencies. I think a very key sort of discussion topic at the moment, particularly for floating wind, is moving towards a modularization approach to enable mass manufacture. And this is really what we're sort of seeing as the potential to sort of reduce costs in a big way within floating wind. Grid connection, the next sort of key topic, and something we've seen a lot of challenges in Scotland. And I think this is going to be a particularly relevant aspect for SIDS as well as other markets. So in Scotland, we have quite remote areas, so the west coast and the islands, where we've got low voltage networks. They're very much at capacity, there's no headroom to connect. And what this means is that it's just, it would trigger sort of significant levels of investment in terms of the reinforcements required. So it's costly, but it's also time consuming to actually realise all of those upgrades that are needed. And there's a lot of risk associated with that, given sort of the complex sort of regulatory processes that are kind of combined into that. In Scotland, we see very much higher grid charges compared to England. So we've got connections in away from the demand centres in Scotland, and that's at the moment reflected in the sort of the costing. So I think one thing to consider is whether it's worth moving more to sort of decentralised systems for sort of newer markets, or where there are sort of heavily grid constrained sort of networks, whereby smaller projects may enable you to kind of get things up and running a bit faster. You can kind of enable sort of lower levels of investment and more sort of staggered approach to the network development as the capacity builds up. The third thing for grid is about the sort of onus on developers and what who kind of owns what in terms of developing and owning the assets, and that's quite an onerous one for UK particularly. If you look at Europe, there are alternatives in terms of kind of who develops parts of the grid, and that can have very big impact on sort of the commercial viability of the projects. So route to market, in the UK, we've very much used the subsidy scheme. We've had two different systems. So we started with the ROCs, and then the CFD, Principles for Difference scheme came in a bit later on. And so that's just shown in the graph on the right there. And what we see is sort of initially as the industry progressed, there wasn't much in the way of cost reduction, but then costs sort of rapidly fell, coinciding with the introduction of the CFD scheme. Now, that's potentially because that is a competitive scheme and it's really driving cost reduction. That's definitely a part to play. Perhaps also a part to play that, you know, the industry had kind of matured enough under the ROC scheme to then enable that sort of rapid cost reduction to be achieved at that time. The other thing that UK does is ring fences, or enables the development of floating wind alongside fixed, sort of a new development there. So they're not competing with each other. There's seen as a role for both to play and a value to both of them continuing to be developed in tandem. We're also seeing sort of a creep in of alternative routes to market, I think partly driven by the high levels of competition. So we've had the sort of first power purchase agreements being announced. We've also got people getting quite interested in hydrogen production, energy storage. That potentially can be for electricity generation, but we're also seeing not only in Scotland, but in other parts of the world, looking at ammonia production, particularly for developing countries, that can be of interest. Just the last point there is the long development timeline, and that has a really big impact on sort of commercial viability. Offshore wind projects generally are quite a long timeline. In Scotland, you know, 8 to 10 years could be quite typical. There are ways to sort of reduce that, but again, it's a sort of a factor in terms of who your investors and developers will be. So just to conclude, I think key recommendations. One is having a sort of carefully managed marine spatial planning to optimize that kind of industry growth and the project pipeline and make sure you're balancing across all stakeholder needs. And that really has to be informed by strong data collection and management from the outset. Coupled with sort of clear regulatory processes to encourage developers and give them the certainty they need to make those investment decisions. And of course, making sure the site and the technology are suitable and appropriate to the state of the market. Supply chain capacity building is going to be absolutely key in new markets. I think potentially a coordinated approach, a regional based approach could be a good way to go to attract the sort of right levels of investment. And I think also critical is having that project pipeline that's sort of concrete and it's confirmed to initiate the investment that's needed. And finally, definition of a viable route to market. So there's a technical side. What's the solution for connecting to grid, or do we need to look at something else? Could it be decentralization? And of course, the commercial side. What do we need in terms of subsidies to drive the progression of the market? So thank you very much. Come back.
That's great. Thanks so much, Kate. Excuse me. And we've got some great questions coming in. And I know some of the speakers have been responding through the chat or the question and answer function, responding to those. We'll try and take some of the key questions that are cross-cutting and are relevant to the range of what we're covering here in the presentations. But I think with the focus on time management that we have here to make sure we've got the input from all of our really excellent speakers and presenters, we'll keep moving. And Kate, from your presentation there, you really started to segue into the financials in particular there. So let's go ahead and move on to our next section on financing offshore wind and floating solar PV. And we have, we'll kick that off with Mark Leibhorn, who's a senior energy specialist at the World Bank. And then I'll introduce the other two speakers as we come to them. So Mark, we'll pass the opportunity over to you. Thanks.
Thanks, Paul. My slides up. Okay, hopefully you can see those. So, hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Mark Leibhorn. I'm Senior Energy Specialist in the World Bank, and I co-lead the World Bank Group's Offshore Wind Development Programme. Over the next few minutes, I'll talk to you a little bit about what we're doing in the programme, the support we're offering to countries and helping them to exploit their offshore wind resources. I'll talk about some of the financing and the opportunities to support these projects. And I'll also touch upon some of the work that colleagues are doing in floating solar in the marine environment. So we started the offshore wind development program in 2019 with the sole aim of taking offshore wind to some of these new emerging markets, focusing on developing countries, and recognizing the advances that we've seen in the technology, the cost reductions that we've seen, and realizing that the technology is now affordable, particularly for our developing countries, and that there is a huge opportunity out there for them. And the program's objective really is to deploy offshore wind and support deployment of offshore wind. So we want to build a pipeline of bankable projects and do all the work that is required to get there. We've got quite a comprehensive support program, ranging from fairly high-level global knowledge building and sharing work, through to higher-level advisory work that we can do with the bank, and down to sort of more detailed recipient executed work. So this is work that is carried out by our country governments. I'll talk to you about a couple of those in my next slide. At a global level, I'm sure a lot of you have seen I hope a lot of you have seen the technical resource mapping work that we carried out last year, produced a whole series of maps for technical resource in developing countries. That's really helped to emphasize the opportunity that is out there for offshore wind. And I think many jurisdictions didn't quite realize the magnitude of this opportunity. Hopefully some of you would have also seen the flagship knowledge report that we produced back in September and launched that, called the Key Factors for Successful Development of Offshore Wind in Emerging Markets. And this sets out a whole series of good practices and lessons learned from established markets. We're also currently working on an environmental and social framework to advise marine spatial planning, recognizing that this is an important component, as Kate mentioned in the previous presentation, and this really needs to come up front to help reduce risk. And we're also starting to look at the role of concessional financing. I feel this is a really important part of the puzzle to help reduce the cost of certainly the first projects in these markets. And we have to acknowledge that a lot of these markets are sensitive for price and would like offshore wind to become competitive with other forms of generation as quickly as possible. So you can see here a list of the countries that we're currently supporting on offshore wind. We're also working with a number of smaller and developing states, including Fiji, Papua New Guinea, and more recently St. Lucia. So that's really to look at what is the opportunity there and how might they proceed to develop offshore wind. And I'll talk a bit more about some of those opportunities and challenges in another slide. To summarize on the support that we can offer, typically we're starting our engagement with countries at an initial high level, often calling these roadmaps or country scoping studies. This is to look at the wider picture, so the whole opportunity and challenges for offshore wind. These produce a series of recommendations of how a country could proceed with developing offshore wind. And those recommendations form the basis of the next pieces of support that we can offer. As I mentioned previous slide, this could be work that we carry out as the bank at a higher level, looking at helping supporting policy and regulations and sort of high level advisory, but then also progressing to sort of more detailed work that the countries can execute themselves, gathering data, preparing projects, and designing tenders that they can use to procure projects. Ultimately, we've got our eyes on providing finance to both the public and private sector. The program is a joint World Bank and IFC program, meaning that we can support both governments and the private sector with financial support. So on the World Bank side, this could be public sector lending, particularly for grid connections and shared infrastructure, but also provide provision of grants and guarantees to help reduce risk. And on the IFC side, this would be private sector lending to project developers, but also the ports and the supply chain and also the provision of guarantees, again, to help reduce risk. And we're also trying to catalyze other finance into these markets to help reduce the risk and help bring other financiers to support. So I think Ben presented the image on the top left here showing the opportunity in the Caribbean. There's an awful lot of opportunity in the Caribbean for offshore wind. For your reference, anything that's orange, red, or purple is good, above sort of 7 meters a second. But also there's quite a few other SIDs that have got potential, and I've highlighted Fiji here. So often these markets have got a very high price of power, a desire to decarbonize, a desire to improve their energy security and get away from importing fossil fuels. They need to look at other resources to minimize the use of land. And I think that offshore wind or large generation at a lower cost could help to also unlock other industrialization opportunities that may not have been affordable previously. But there's some pretty big challenges to overcome. Many of these islands, because of their scale, the typical offshore wind project size would be 100 megawatts or less. And this is comparing to the industry sort of norm now, which is about 700 or 800 megawatts, but sometimes even well over a gigawatt. This is small scale for some people, particularly project developers and the supply chains. They will see this as a very small opportunity that is potentially in quite a remote market. And also there's can be quite a limited opportunity to provide local jobs. I mean, providing manufacturing jobs, for instance, in an island is going to be not often possible. On the converse of that, it can also be perceived as a very, very large scale project. So the sort of licensing, permitting, and procurement processes will really test the capability and capacity of local government agencies. Islands often have many environmental and social sensitivities, particularly on biodiversity and the use of the sea for livelihoods. So there's a big potential there for negative impacts. Grid connection, I think, is again one of the really big challenges, and that really does drive the size of projects that can be connected onto the grid, so the stability of that grid and the ability to connect power. I think the last important point here is that this is a very large agreement between a developer or an operator, generator, and an off-taker. So this PPA agreement, power purchase agreement, is much, much larger than they would be used to. It's a big challenge commercially for the financial stability and creditworthiness of that off-taker, and guarantees will definitely be needed to reduce the risk and lower the costs. So my final slide here is looking at marine, particularly nearshore floating solar. This has got a lot of the drivers that offshore wind has got in terms of needing to look to the sea as a new resource for energy generation. The photo on the top right here, I think, quite clearly emphasizes that. This is from the Maldives, showing a lot of any space that's available is being used for solar already. So we need to look for other opportunities. We're working at the moment with the Maldives on a large renewable energy project, which is a combination of loans and grants from the World Bank and the Climate Investment Fund. This includes floating solar and battery storage. Currently working on technical advisory for a number of sites for about 10 megawatts of floating solar, gathering site information and environmental and social data to be part of the tender. We've also got grants as part of this project to help buy down the cost of the tariff, which helps to reduce the cost of that tariff to the government, and also supporting the sort of risk of offtake. So that's the guaranteeing essentially payments to the generator. And then also at a global level, hopefully some of you on this call will be familiar with the Where Sun Meets Water publication, which is a flagship solar floating solar publication from ESMAP. We're similarly now starting to work on a publication to look at sort of lessons learned and challenges with floating solar in the marine environment, looking at everything from technical challenges to environmental and social. And hopefully we'll see that in the near future. So thank you very much for listening, and happy to answer any questions. Back to you, Paul.
Thanks very much, Mark. Really good to see the extent to which the bank and IFC, World Bank and IFC are picking up the challenges and opportunities, and really that those fundamental studies that have come out recently have really been instrumental in understanding both the country level and the global opportunities, and then working on the financial side, as you were saying, that's our focus right now. So with that in mind, let's move to Lano Fonua, who is Operations Officer for Energy at the Caribbean Development Bank, to hear about the efforts going on there, particularly in regards to finance. So Lano, over to you.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good day to everybody. I'll just set up the presentation here. Greetings from the Caribbean Development Bank. And thanks to my colleagues gone before me, and the obviously special mention to the UN Under Secretary General and Deputy Director, and Irina for putting this together. Just to go over a little bit about the Caribbean Development Bank. We are a multilateral regional development bank in the Caribbean, similar to some of the other development banks. We're aiming at contributing to economic development and development in general. I think one of the things that sets us apart is that all of our member countries are small island developing states, or borrowing member countries, small island developing states. So our day-to-day issues are all in that space around promoting and achieving this development in that context. So without further ado, onto the main aim of this webinar, which is to look at marine renewable energy. And at CDB, we're quite excited, having just completed a study into this, which has just been published on our website and with a collaboration with the Inter-American Development Bank. And I think this statement here is why we're excited, because of the potential. As some of the presenters before me had put up the map of the Caribbean there, that there's quite a large potential there to provide renewable energy, secure, reliable, clean energy from various versions of offshore wind in particular. And I think that's looking at the aims of the countries in the region, something that's going to be really important over the next 10 years. As a really viable option for the energy mix. So I just wanted to go over some of the highlights that we found. And as discussed before, just the wind resource itself in and around our countries is very good. And that potential marries very well with the depth, the ocean depth. So if we combine those two things, the opportunities there, if we're prospecting for potential wind sites close to the countries that we are working in, it's very good. And there's a lot of opportunity there to sort of narrow down and identify some key potential wind farm sites. And keeping that in mind, we can look at just the whole potential, particularly for fixed and floating wind. We're talking about 138 gigawatts of estimated resource there. And when you combine that with that sort of demand in our countries, it far outweighs what's there. And so I think that's important, looking at the potential for the electrification of transport, which is a trend that's going to happen globally, and the need for more energy. The technically exploitable resource in the Caribbean is there. So if we look at that combined with these cost trends that were covered, and we look at the time periods for these cost trends, over the next 10 years, as I mentioned, trending downwards as these larger countries which are driving the cost down with the implementation of these larger wind farms. Obviously, as SIDS, we'll be price takers, and I think it bodes well for our situation, having such a large resource and seeing prices decline globally. Really put this option for renewables firmly in the mix for projects over this next 10-year period. So, you know, to summarize, what we're finding is both fixed and floating tend to float to the bottom, to the top of the technical readiness spectrum. We looked at OTEC, seawater, air conditioning, wave energy, and tidal energy as well as part of this study, but really, you know, the state of the technical readiness of those other options and the data that was available, you know, they tend to fit into the pre-commercial technical readiness, and that's same as floating offshore wind, which I think was touched on in an earlier presentation. So, but again, if we're looking at timescales over the next 10 years for you know, prospecting, establishing, and really looking to implement offshore wind or offshore sea energy project, then fixed offshore wind is ready today. As my colleague from the experience in Scotland noted, you know, that it's ready to go today. It's a very well established market there, and you know, floating may come along over the next period. But I think putting all these things together is something, you know, from the bank's perspective, is one of the areas that, you know, we're trying to get the information out there to reduce the risk for developers and help them identify these areas. I think if I go back to those previous two maps, that really shows, you know, the potential, and for our countries as well. So, you know, both governments and utilities in their long-term planning over the next 10 years can be looking at this. I mean, the cost, talking about looking at around $4 million per megawatt complete development cost. You know, a quarter of that is the turbine. So, you know, depending on the energy needs, that's the sort of ballpark that they're looking at. And from the bank's perspective, in terms of financing, I think, you know, at this stage we're really focusing on helping developers and countries understand the risks or the potential, and to be able to sort of support that information gathering at this stage as they look to their strategies for incorporating more renewable energy into their grids. But just to follow on from Mark's statement there, I think, you know, on the public sector side, sort of establishing that playing field, supporting investment in transmission distribution, supporting investment in government and utility planning, I think is something on the public sector side that we're really focusing on ourselves to try and support. Obviously, something that the private sector would need to be taking the lead on. So I'll just end on with a link to that report, which I think I'm seeing some of the questions coming up answers a number of those questions around you know, hurricane resilience design and some of the more detail on the cost. So I'll leave that there for colleagues to have a read through.
Great, thanks very much, Lando. Really a great cascading series of presentations here that build on each other and reinforce each other, and really excellent to see the progress being made in the Caribbean and the potential. And as you mentioned, a lot of the questions are being answered by in the presentations or the material, or reports such as the one you presented and the one that's referred to by Mark at the World Bank. So let's continue on with this section on finance with Raquel Moses, who's the Chief Executive Officer at the Caribbean Climate Smart Accelerator. And we've had a chance to interact, Raquel, over the years as the accelerator got going. So I know you are able to join us with more of a discussion now, and really happy to get your input on how the accelerator is moving along, and particularly in relationship, of course, to offshore wind and floating solar PV, and really address some of the points that have been coming up so far today from the accelerator side. So over to you.
Thank you so much, Paul. So the Accelerator is a coalition of 28 countries across the region, ironically, many of the same countries as the Caribbean Development Bank. And, you know, the challenge and the opportunity with financing offshore wind and floating solar are twofold. It's one that we find that the maturity of the solutions available are not yet at mass adoption. And secondly, the risk profile required for the investment puts the region at yet another disadvantage. We wholeheartedly agree that the region should be a pioneer and a petri dish for scaling solutions to entire populations. And it's the easiest way for us to develop new methodologies and serve as an example to the world. The challenge, however, is that the risk for us is high until these solutions are adopted at scale, and many of the presenters talked about that. So from our vantage point, what is needed are investors and philanthropists who see the vision and the potential that we do, governments to create policy frameworks that make it possible. So, and we know that what we're asking for is difficult in each instance. However, for the investors, for the most part, we're asking them to work outside of their core and primary markets. At the moment, we're seeing the most growth in US and China, but we're also looking to markets like the Middle East. Like Trinidad and Tobago, where I'm based and where I'm from, their core industry in the Middle East is oil and gas. They understand energy. And we need investors who understand the energy, long-term investment, and are willing and able to serve as the Netflix and not the blockbuster of global energy. So what we're seeking is non-predatory experimentation in the region. The majority of the investment in new solutions that are proven can be tested at scale within the region. So, you know, a lot of countries are looking at, okay, let's do our first implementation. But how do you cover the last mile? And I think that is one of the things that can be solved in the region before mass adoption across the globe. For philanthropists, we're asking them to support these initiatives by using their grants or investments to de-risk these investments, enabling them to take place. And governments in the region need to develop mechanisms for dealing with unsolicited proposals. We're seeing lots of struggles with that. That will allow them to capitalize on new opportunities with little risk. And we are willing to support them in the development of that. So what we're seeing at the moment is the following: very little implementation compared to the need for energy transition in the Caribbean. Cuba, Curacao, Guadeloupe, and Jamaica are leading in the region in wind, and we're not aware of any floating projects in the countries that we cover. However, the future has incredible potential. And as Lana would have presented from the Caribbean Development Bank's perspective, we have far more potential than we actually have the need for energy. And so the mobilization, the sort of electrification of transportation, we see as a major milestone in helping us to close those gaps. So from the Caribbean Climate Smart Accelerators perspective, how we're addressing it is as follows. First, we're partnering with many innovative developers of new solutions and technologies. And that component for us is really exciting to look at the potential that we have. We're seeing using sort of abandoned resources offshore to develop new offshore wind type solutions, but those have not yet started. They're just in sort of the assessment phase. And we're introducing them through the region to connect with countries with the ability to implement. A requirement, though, of the Caribbean Climate Smart Accelerator is that any investor in the region be additive and be philanthropic. We need suppliers that commit to the region to understand that anyone that works with us needs to add in an exponential way. We also need suppliers and investors to understand that as much as we need external investment, we want to share in the profitability of what's available. We want external investment, but not at preferential or higher rates than we're able to offer to our regional investors. So the second thing that we've done is that we formed a financial advisory committee, and they are committed to transform the climate action landscape within the region. And this committee is made up largely of leaders of regional financial institutions, including a representative from the Caribbean Development Bank. And we provide them with projects on a monthly basis that are ready for investment, or projects that we hope they are able to invest in with some de-risking private grant capital. And the investments that we want to see are patient catalytic capital that will really help us to make a difference. So looking to the ocean for energy makes sense for us, as Ms. Gauri Singh described in her opening. We have limited land masses. We are called small island developing states, but we're really big ocean states because we control far more ocean than land. The third thing that we've done is that we just partnered with the World Intellectual Property Organization to conduct training to entrepreneurs on blue economy opportunities, because that's where we see a great deal of development, not just in energy, but across the board. And finally, on the 1st of December, we hosted a high-level donor matchmaking event where we shared 23 projects, sorry about the dog, valued at 10.5 billion. And the 5 philanthropists, donor investors that participated and that we had on the webinar, we make them with some of these investments. And we plan to do 3 more of these next year. But what this event allowed us to do, in addition to matchmaking and funding, is showcasing new funding models that have the ability to be brought to bear to fund the innovations that we'd like to see. So in conclusion, there are 5 things that we hope happen. First, we hope that even more regional investors become involved, including the private sector. Second, that we spur investment on a mechanism that outlines for the private sector how much companies are spending or quote unquote investing in fossil fuels, and assign a portion of that spend to investing in green solutions that we can build our economies on. And we see that as a major mechanism helping to fund some of the things that we want to see, especially as it relates to floating solar and offshore wind. That we get more participation in the UN Race to Zero campaign, rallying non-state actors to take rigorous and immediate action to halve global emissions, and that we see more participation in the Race to Resilience, which seeks to catalyze a step change in ambition for climate resilience, putting people and nature first, where we thrive in spite of climate shocks and stresses. And I'm a global ambassador for both of those campaigns. The great thing for us is that energy transition is both a part of our climate adaptation as well as our mitigation. COVID has showed us that the impacts of disruption in global supply chains, including fossil fuels, that they succumb to pandemics, but also could be deleteriously impacted by hurricanes and storms. So the fourth thing that we want to see is that regional entrepreneurs participate in developing new solutions. And considering the scale at which we're talking, I know that this is a big ask, but we know that what we produce in the region is excellence, not just in Olympics, where we dominate in the per capita medal count, not just in climate action, where we have the highest concentration of contributors to the IPCC reports per capita, but we also have the first female vice president of the US is half Jamaican. So we know that we're capable of magnificent things. We just need to put our minds to it. But finally, and our biggest hope and ask is that we find a way to live in harmony with nature, that we're healthy, happy, fulfilled, and safe in an altogether brighter tomorrow in which big ocean states, the current sort of global underdogs, continue our trajectory of punching well above our weight, and we're leading in providing green solutions that others can adopt. So that's our hope, and I thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Raquel, for really drawing that into the real practicalities of the project pipeline and what we need to do to link innovators and investors to really deliver on the critical, important potential here of renewables from wind and solar, amongst others, offshore. I know we're running a bit behind here, and so we'll move to our last couple of presentations. And then I know and grateful for some of the presenters who have been able to respond to questions through in a written form through the chat. So let's wrap this up with the last couple of presentations on advancing deployment of offshore wind and floating solar PV, and everything we've heard so far has really led up to this this really practical implementation need and opportunity to really move forward with this this important area of opportunity for great ocean states. So first we have Cherianne Farquharson, who is knowledge management and capital development expert at the Caribbean Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency, and followed by she will be followed by Simona Kile, who's director for the Department of Energy within the Ministry of Transport, Energy and Tourism in Tuvalu. So Sherry, if we could ask you to take the floor. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. And good morning and good afternoon to everyone who has joined us. And I'm going to be presenting from the Caribbean perspective in terms of what needs to be done. And there is a lot of work that needs to be done to accelerate the development of what you've highlighted as this most untapped resource in our ocean states or small islands. And so I want to start by having a look at where we are today. And what we're looking at here are the renewable energy performance against targets for 2020. And we see that there is quite a significant gap between the blue bars, which is the 2020 performance, and the red bars, which is the national target, and then the green, which is the CARICOM target. And this CARICOM target is for across the region for us to be 47% renewables by 2027. Last year coming in at just over 11%. So you see there's quite a lot of work to be done. And several of the CARICOM member states have articulated interest in developing ocean energy technologies in their policies or in their climate commitments. So there is definitely interest from the region for this. And so to get to this point of having implemented these projects to meet these commitments. And Kate mentioned a few of these steps that we have to take when she did her presentation, looking at the site selection, analysis of the resource, finding the right off-taker. We did mention, and Raquel spoke about, the availability of the resource is much larger than the electricity needs. And so there has to be the assessment of other possible off-takers, whether it's going to be electric vehicles or it's going to be the development of or the production of hydrogen. But we'll have to find the right off-taker, get the permits, as the right technologies, the right team. When, as I mentioned, team, just to let you know, I'm not capital development, it's capacity development. That is a part of my focus at the CCRI. So helping to develop the right teams. And then we've spoken also about the capital investment that is required and then getting to the point of construction. And so there are a few gaps that exist, however, to move the region from what has been articulated in the policies and the climate commitments to actual project implementation. And so there are some assessments that have been done, but that is more of a large scale. And so data collection and assessment for engineering grade assessment is definitely required. So we can answer the question of just how much resource is available to be harnessed and where exactly those resources are located. And then is it feasible for us to extract these ocean energy resources? And then to answer the question of which technologies would be most appropriate for the region. I did see a few persons in the chat mention, considerations for extreme weather events. And so that is definitely one thing that we have to keep in mind, as well as the question of size. A lot of these offshore installations tends to be very large scale, but within small islands, you will have a number of electricity grids where the total grid is less than 100 megawatts. And so the issue of the size of the wind turbines, especially that can be installed, is one of the things that we have to consider, as well as moving from policy articulation to actual electricity sector planning or energy sector planning to include these offshore wind and floating solar PV resources. And Raquel mentioned the project preparation that needs to go into making sure that these projects are actually bankable, so we can have that matchmaking done with the right investors. And then the project implementation, monitoring, and evaluation. So those are some of the gaps that we need to fill between what has been articulated by the member states and actually getting to the point of implementing projects. The CCRI has definitely been positioned to help our member states fill this gap. So with all the policies and plans and projects that come out, we're unable to deliver these solutions for the people of the region without the right partnerships. And while we work with our member states in developing electricity sector plans through the integrated resource and resilience plans and helping to support the bankability of projects through our project preparation facility, which also will help to facilitate matchmaking, we cannot do this on our own. John Reed mentioned SIDS partnerships in the Q&A, and working together and leveraging economies of scale is definitely a part of the approach that the CICRI has for the region. So to get member states to work together to collectively go after the grant funding or to apply for the loans or whatever it is that's required so that we can have that reduced megawatt hour cost because of the economies of scale. We have started this process of working with partners. So we are working currently with the Regional Universities Network to do some of these engineering grade resource assessments to determine what is available and what are those lessons that are going to be contextually relevant for the region so that we can support our member states to make these informed decisions about implementing ocean technologies like floating wind or floating solar. We're also embarking on a tripartite agreement with the Caribbean Community Climate Change Center, 5Cs, and IRENA. And the first project emanating from this partnership will include resource assessments and a tangible intervention emanating from the data and the information that we would have collected, and capacity building and knowledge management around offshore energy. So looking at ocean energy. And that is going to be the first, as I said, project leading out of that tripartite agreement. But this is just a small portion of what the region really needs to be well positioned to exploit our ocean energy resources. And so we invite those of you who are part of this forum to share with us how you too may contribute to this energy transition in the region. We are looking for partnerships because we recognize that that's the only way that we're going to move from what we would like to see happen and to actual project implementation, to seeing the megawatts installed and being deployed across the region. And with that, thank you.
Thanks very much, Shuri. I think this really highlights the level of need for the partnerships, as you say, to learn both across the sectors, across countries within regions and amongst regions. And for someone who started out working on SIDS over 40 years ago and in the formative stages of AOSIS and other developments, really important to keep that message moving forward. And we'll touch on that as we close up in a few minutes in terms of next steps and opportunities. But first, let's hear from Simona Kile from Tuvalu.
Hi. Can you hear me?
We can hear you great. Thanks, Simona.
Apologies when the connection, we are having a bad weather in this side of the world. Taloka, Simona, and I am the Director for Department of Energy here in Tuvalu. And I will be talking about the continue on from the previous presentations. So just small information about Tuvalu. Tuvalu is situated in the South Pacific with a land area of 26 kilometers squared, that is 10 square miles, and it's the third smallest country, and with an EEZ of 700 kilometers squared, 700,000 kilometers squared, and that is the 38th largest in the world. The highest elevation is 15 feet, with a population of 11,000. To all have the national determined contribution of having 100% renewable energy electricity generated by 2025, and also energy sector of 60% below the 2010 level by 2025. Going offshore is a priority of the government at the moment. As I showed before, the land area is small, and thus we think that going offshore will be the solution. As you can see on the right, there is one of the construction in one of the outer islands, fixed solar PV on Fetau Island. And we have a demo on the Tafua Pond, supposed to be installed last year, but due to COVID, it has been delayed. Offshore wind and floating solar PV is the future. And so far research is done on this. We rely heavily on our solar energy, but all in land. As for, so there's a research potential for offshore wind as well as solar PVs. And there's a possibility for research on the offshore farms on atoll islands with large lagoons, mainly because these lagoons can really have rough seas in times of storms and high tides. Partnership that are lacking, not to be a broken record, but mostly it's funding. We lack funding and therefore also the access to funds. These are some of the issues that we can see that Tuvalu is facing at the moment. Research work on the possibility and the viabilities of this offshore wind as well as the PV, whereby you have them floating or fixed, and also the technical expertise. These are some of the issues that we feel that the partnership are lacking at the moment. With that small presentation, I would like to thank you all for your time.
Thank you very much, Simona. Great to see what's moving forward there in Tuvalu, kind of the reality check from a very small island state, and one that I know well, having spent about a year working there in 1980 for UNDP. And that's really highlights the specific challenges as we wrap things up here in this really excellent session here, focusing on offshore wind and floating solar PV. For small island developing states, Irina is really taking this, taking the lead on this, working with the UN, OHR, LLS. I think we've got some great material and momentum here that's showing the work that's going on across the countries and across the regions. I know at the Secretariat they've been at Irina, they've been taking note of the questions and recommendations, and we'll be pulling that together as we move forward. As mentioned by the Undersecretary General, there is the Our Ocean Conference, excuse me, and associated with that, that will be in Palau this year, next year early, as it's been delayed, as you all know. Associated with that is the UN OHR LLS Global Business Network. The World Ocean Council is working with the UN on advancing business partnerships, and the Global Business Network working in partnership across a range of issues and sectors. But I think particularly here, the clear potential, the opportunities, the importance of offshore energy sources for large ocean states is important, and linking this and critical to the future of large ocean states, linking this to the innovation, the investment, the technical development communities, the multilateral banks, et cetera, as we've heard, is essential for really moving this forward at the pace and in the ways needed, and really creating and delivering on the vast potential here. So with that, I'd like to encourage all of you to continue to be involved in this interaction through Irina, through the UN OHR LLS. We will certainly be doing our part at the World Ocean Council to facilitate and move this along. I'd like to thank all of the excellent speakers and presentations. I know the recording of this will be available so that we can reach out to a larger audience. And I would encourage all of you to look for the information on the second and third webinars in this series as we continue this important work together. So with that, I apologize that we don't have the time to get into the specific questions and a Q&A session as we're over time. But with that, we'll close this off and look forward to continuing to work with all of you in this important effort moving forward. Thanks very much.